Today we're digging deep into South Korea's little-known economic truths to understand the capital game rules behind the glitz of chaebols. Let's start with a counterintuitive question. South Korea is often hailed as an economic miracle, a developed country with world-class corporations like Samsung and Hyundai. But did you know that nearly 80% of its GDP is controlled by large enterprises, and half of young startups can't survive for 5 years? This seemingly prosperous economy is actually walking a tightrope between monopoly and fragility. What is hidden behind this contradiction? That is exactly what we're going to unravel today. First, let's talk about the first key point, chaebol monopoly, the capital chessboard behind 40% of GDP. When we talk about South Korea's economy, chaebols are the first thing that comes to mind. Samsung's smartphones, Hyundai's cars, LG's home appliances. These brands are everywhere in our lives. The general perception is that chaebols are the backbone of South Korea's economic takeoff, driving technological progress and creating countless jobs. But the little-known truth is that this backbone has long evolved into an oversized economic oligarchy. According to South Korean government data reported by Yonhap News in May 2025, the total sales of South Korea's 5 largest conglomerates accounted for about 40% of the country's nominal GDP in 2024. Among them, Samsung Group alone contributed 13% of GDP, with 331.8 trillion won in sales, followed by Hyundai Motor Group at 11% and SK Group at 8.1%. If we expand the scope to 92 large enterprise groups with assets exceeding 5 trillion won, their total sales reached 2007.7 trillion won, accounting for a staggering 78.8% of South Korea's nominal GDP. To put this in perspective, it is like a country's economy being propped up by just a handful of giant companies, which is extremely rare even among developed economies. What is more noteworthy is the cross-shareholding structure within these chaebols. A report from Gia Investment shows that South Korea's top 30 chaebols control the lifeblood of the economy through high internal cross-shareholding ratios. They account for 10.7% of total manufacturing employment, 45% of total manufacturing sales, and 50% of total assets. This cross-shareholding is like a dense spider web. The founding family can control a huge business empire with a relatively small amount of capital. It is equivalent to using a primary school student's pocket money to command a professional army. So essentially, South Korea's economic prosperity is a top-heavy prosperity dominated by chaebols. This structure allowed South Korea to concentrate resources for rapid development during the industrialization stage. But as the economy matures, it has become a shackle restricting market vitality. The resources of the entire society are continuously siphoned into the hands of a few chaebols, leaving small and medium-sized enterprises struggling to survive. Next, let's move to the second key truth, small and medium-sized enterprises' dilemma. Why does government support fail to deliver? The phenomenon we often see is that the South Korean government has introduced a large number of policies to support small and medium-sized enterprises. They are considered a key part of the economy, accounting for a large share of the total number of enterprises and employment. But the little-known truth is that these support policies have not really reversed the predicament of small and medium-sized enterprises. According to a 2019 OECD report on South Korea's business dynamics, South Korean startups contribute more to job creation than those in other countries at first glance. But young enterprises face greater survival difficulties. The proportion of young enterprises exited the market is relatively high, and their growth rate after entry is significantly lower than the international average. From 2010 to 2015, the average employment growth rate of South Korean startups in the first 3 years after establishment was only 24% in the manufacturing and 9% In contrast, the average in other countries was 27% and 24%, respectively. Data from South Korea's Ministry of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises and Startups is even more worrying. In 2023, the number of technology-based startups decreased by 3.5% year-on-year, and the entrepreneurial rate of people under 30 dropped by 1.8%. A friend of mine who works in Seoul told me that many young people in South Korea would rather wait in long lines for a chance to work at Samsung or Hyundai than start their own businesses. Because starting a business means competing with chaebols that have absolute advantages in funds, channels, and technology, which is almost a suicide mission. Let me give you a real case. A South Korean startup that developed smart home technology once launched a very innovative product. But shortly after, a chaebol subsidiary launched a similar product with lower prices and stronger marketing channels. Within 6 months, the startup ran out of funds and was forced to close down. This is not an isolated case, but a common fate of many South Korean small and medium-sized enterprises. So the core logic here is that when the market is monopolized by a few giants, no matter how generous government support is, it is just blood transfusion that can't help small and medium-sized enterprises develop blood-making capabilities. The root problem lies in the uneven playing field. Chaebols can use their dominant position to squeeze the living space of small and medium-sized enterprises, making it difficult for market resources to flow to more innovative small enterprises. Now, let's explore the third key point: core industry crisis, the risk trap of a single engine. Another well-known phenomenon is that South Korea has world-leading core industries such as semiconductors and power batteries. But the little-known truth is that these pillar industries are facing a serious single-engine risk. The entire industry's prosperity and decline depend on the performance of a few enterprises. And once problems arise, the entire industrial chain will be shaken. Let's take the power battery industry as an example. According to a report by China Economic Net in March 2025, South Korea's three major battery giants, Samsung ZTE Energy Solution and SK On, recorded a total operating loss of 841.6 billion won in the fourth quarter of 2024. Among them, Samsung's DI lost 256.7 billion won in a single quarter, LG Energy Solution lost 225.5 billion won, and SK On lost 359.4 billion won. Samsung's Z situation is particularly grim. Its power battery loading volume fell by 10.6% year-on-year in 2024, and its market share dropped to 3.3%. What caused this collective loss? First, weak demand in the European and American electric vehicle markets. According to data from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, EU pure electric vehicle sales fell by 5.9% year-on-year in 2024, and US electric vehicle sales growth was far below the global average. Second, delayed technology commercialization. South Korean enterprises have technical reserves in ternary lithium batteries and 4,680 large cylindrical batteries, but they have been slow to commercialize them. At the same time, they lag behind in the transition to lithium iron phosphate batteries, missing opportunities in the mid to low-end market. Third, cost and capacity pressure. The construction of new factories in Europe and the United States has led to a surge in fixed costs, while insufficient demand has caused factory utilization rates to plummet. SK On's capacity utilization rate dropped sharply from 95% in 2023 to 46%. The semiconductor industry, another pillar of South Korea's economy, is also facing similar risks. According to a report by the People's Daily Korean Channel in August 2025, the overall profits of South Korea's top 500 enterprises in the first half of the year relied almost entirely on SK hynix. Excluding SK hynix, the profits of other enterprises fell by 1.7% year-on-year. SK hynix benefited from the AI boom and dominated the HBM market, with operating profits surging by 99.3% year-on-year. In contrast, Samsung Electronics' operating profits plummeted by 33.4% due to falling behind in HBM competition. So essentially, South Korea's core industries are trapped in a single-engine risk. Over-reliance on a few enterprises and specific markets makes the industrial chain extremely fragile. Once the market environment changes or technological iterations occur, the entire industry will face huge shock. This is like building a high-rise building on a single pillar. Once the pillar shakes, the entire building will be in danger. Finally, let's uncover the fourth and most hidden truth. The hidden truth. What is the cost of the chaebol economy? After analyzing the above phenomena, we can now uncover the most hidden truth of South Korea's economy. The chaebol economy that drove rapid growth has long been accompanied by huge social and economic costs. These costs are gradually emerging and becoming a constraint on South Korea's sustainable economic development. First, it is the lack of market vitality. When chaebols monopolize most resources, small and medium-sized enterprises and startups have difficulty getting opportunities for development. As the OECD report points out, Korean young enterprises not only have a high exit rate but also a low growth rate. This lack of vitality makes it difficult for South Korea's economy to generate new growth points, and it can only rely on the continuous expansion of existing chaebols, forming a vicious circle. Second, it is the pressure on employment and entrepreneurship for young people. Data from South Korea's Ministry of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises and Startups shows that the entrepreneurial rate of people in their 30s dropped by 3.5% year-on-year in 2023, and the entrepreneurial rate of people in their 40s and 50s also declined. For young people, entering a chaebol has become the only way out, which not only increases the competition pressure in the job market, but also stifles the innovative spirit of the whole society. Third, it is the hidden risks of the financial system. The cross-shareholding structure of chaebols makes the financial risks of enterprises highly correlated. Once one enterprise in the system has problems, it will quickly spread to other related enterprises, triggering a chain reaction. At the same time, chaebol's huge scale allows them to easily obtain preferential loans from banks, which not only distorts the allocation of financial resources, but also accumulates a large amount of non-performing assets in the banking system. As mentioned in the book Korean Chaebol Empire, the success of South Korea's chaebols is closely linked to the country's industrialization process. But as the economy enters a new stage, the contradictions between the chaebol system and market economy have become increasingly prominent. The cost of maintaining the chaebol economy is getting higher and higher, and it is gradually becoming a burden on South Korea's economic development. Now, let's move to the conclusion. Pain plus reflection equals progress today. We've uncovered the little-known economic truths behind South Korea's prosperity. From the 40% GDP controlled by 5 major chaebols to the difficult survival of small and medium-sized enterprises, and from the single-engine risk of core industries to the hidden costs of the chaebol economy, we can see that no economic model is perfect. The chaebol system that once created miracles is now facing unprecedented challenges. For a country's economy, there is no permanent perfect model, only a model that adapts to the times. Pain plus reflection equals progress. South Korea's economic dilemma is not only a test for the country, but also a revelation for the world. True economic strength does not lie in the prosperity of a few giants, but in the vitality of the entire market. Sustainable growth does not rely on single-engine drive, but on the coordinated development of multiple industries. For ordinary people, understanding this truth can help us look at economic phenomena more rationally. Whether it is investing in South Korean stocks, choosing a career direction, or starting a business, we should see through the surface prosperity and recognize the underlying structural risks. Don't blindly follow the trend of chaebol worship, but pay more attention to the potential of emerging industries and small and medium-sized enterprises. Finally, I want to ask you, do you think South Korea can break the shackles of the chaebol economy? What do you think is the most critical step strengthening anti-monopoly efforts? Increasing support for small and medium-sized enterprises, or promoting technological innovation in emerging industries? Leave your judgment in the comments section. That is all for today's content. Remember, only by seeing through the essence of things can we make more rational choices. See you in the next issue.